Flanked by security guards, Kemi Seba makes his entrance. An enthusiastic crowd welcomes the man who presents himself as the new voice of African unity and independence.
The 21st century will be the century of Pan-Africanism on the continent, in the diaspora. We will be the ones setting the agenda everywhere, even in this country.
In Francophone Africa, anti-French discourse is flourishing. Paris is losing ground, and Moscow is advancing its pawns. In Mali, Burkina Faso, and Central African Republic, pro-Russian governments have come to power over the course of wars and military coups. The propaganda machine is running at full speed. Behind it all, the Wagner Group, presented as Africa's savior. Kemi Seba, Franklin Nyamsi, Nathalie Yamb. In the name of Pan-Africanism, these influencers are pushing a narrative.
You remember well the positive role the Russians played in the emancipation of countries that were under colonial domination.
Who are these Pan-African influencers suspected of playing into the hands of the Kremlin? In the Parisian suburb of Bobigny, Kemi Seba can count on a new generation of followers. Young intellectuals from the African diaspora, worried about the future of the continent.
I think that he's someone with a lot of courage, someone who speaks frankly, and a source of inspiration for emancipated Afro youth.
I didn't know of him at the beginning when he was controversial. Now I see a man who has possibly changed over time.
On social media, Kemi Seba is the figure of Pan-Africanism 2.0, with nearly 1.5 million followers. His favorite topic, fighting against the French presence in Africa.
He's extremely popular because he speaks in a way that's very simplistic, very easy, in a sometimes conspiratorial tone.
Kemi Seba became known in France in the mid-2000s. He's the founder of Tribuka, a radical group inspired by the Black Panther movement. Controversy-seeking comedian Dieudonné gave him his first platform. In April 2006, on Dieudonné's website, Kemi Seba defended Youssouf Fofana, accused of the anti-Semitic murder of Ilan Halimi.
Dirty Negro, the Jews will get you. Those who said that, I threatened them. I threaten them and I tell them if you touch a single hair of Youssouf Fofana, we'll deal with the sidelocks of your rabbis. I said it.
1 month later, his group barged into the Jewish quarter of Rue des Rosiers in Paris.
Filmé sur un téléphone portable à l'image d'une trentaine d'hommes noirs habillés de noir, sans armes, mais menaçants.
Following the scene, Tribuka was dissolved for anti-Semitism and incitement of racial hatred. Kemi Seba found a new audience in Senegal. He traded his leather jacket for more local attire. On the channel 2STV, he made himself the spokesperson for anti-colonialism and the fight against the colonial-era currency. In 2017, in Dakar, he publicly burned a bill of 5,000 CFA francs, an act that got him kicked out of the country, but attracted the attention of a man not yet known on the continent, the head of the Wagner Group.
Yevgeny Prigozhin meets me 1 year after the extraordinary campaign we did against the CFA franc and says, I want to support you. He tells me those who are against our enemies are our friends, and so he supports us logistically.
On the forefront of Russian propaganda, Evgeny Prigozhin became the benefactor of the Pan-African cause. According to documents revealed by a consortium of international journalists, Kemi Seba received financial support from the Wagner leader between 2018 and 2019, a total evaluated at over $400,000. Today, the activist says he no longer has ties with Wagner, but that doesn't mean he's cut off all contact with Russia. For the U.S. State Department, Kemi Seba remains, along with Swiss activist Nathalie Yamb, an essential link in the chain of disinformation sponsored by Prigozhin. He's regularly invited to conferences organized by Moscow.
I also salute all of the French and American spies who have, without a doubt, infiltrated this room.
There, he preaches the end of the globalized world, a concept dear to Kremlin philosopher Alexander Dugin. A great disparager of Western values that he judges decadent, Dugin is also a reference for the European far right. 20 years after making his debut, Kemi Seba has polished his discourse, but the fundamentals are the same.
When a Jew is arrested, even on Mars, we know how the Zionist government functions. But when an African is arrested, attacked, beaten up, killed, we have presidents who come by. I'm here to inquire about the situation, to see if our people aren't suffering too much.
Kemi Seba also denounces the negligence of African leaders. He calls for popular uprising.
Let's take responsibility for ourselves. A free Africa or death. We will overcome.
A free Africa or death. The reference to Thomas Sankara, an icon of Pan-Africanism, is clear.
It seems to me that trying to link Thomas Sankara and Kemi Seba is a big mistake and an attack on Thomas Sankara's integrity. He's someone who didn't just use Pan-Africanism as a mantra. And so to say that this man who led a state, who on the scale of an entire continent and even beyond was able to inspire so many generations of leaders, that his heir is Kemi Seba, who has no institutional grounding, who speaks virtually no African language, I think it would be a horrible insult to history.
Kemi Seba has a sense for drama. 15 minutes into his speech, he suddenly changes targets.
I just got some news. I just learned that France 24 and RFI are in the room.
He doesn't hide his hostility toward French media, which he accuses of bias.
The temptation to kick you out is huge. Because you never let us speak. You never invite us on set. You always invite Oreos on your shows.
Oreo, subordinate, house Negro, those are just words that dress up the accusation. From the moment you go on those channels, in a way you're endorsing a certain form of the defeat of your community, and you become an agent of betrayal. And that's the big problem. There's basically no other form of discussion possible.
Kemi Seba prefers to go on Russian channels. On Russia Today, the influencer speaks as a political leader, promising to promote the partnership proposed by Vladimir Putin.
Russia will be a different partner than the others, starting the moment Moscow avoids the colonial behavior of its predecessors. I also think it's necessary to transfer technology, a win-win deal, a win-win partnership in which each side is truly represented.
Kemi Seba declares his support for African coup leaders, Russia's new allies. He poses with Assimi Goïta, the leader of Mali's military junta. On stage, he even claims a role in the latest geopolitical unrest.
Did you see that in Mali things changed? We contributed majorly. Did you see that in Burkina Faso things changed? And with this team and others, we contributed majorly.
He's now threatening France's other regional allies, like the president of Ivory Coast.
And soon, Alassane Ouattara, you'll understand too.
And the president of Senegal.
Macky Sall. If you don't leave Ousmane Sonko alone, you'll understand too.
He sets it up to look like he's one of the main players, those who took over power in Mali, in Burkina Faso, etc. When we know that the mechanisms are hugely more complex than that. So what he's doing is selling an image of people and of movements that have achieved enough political weight to overthrow governments.
Let me talk to these people, then I'll talk to you.
In the end, Kemi Seba declined our request for an interview. But another influencer did accept to meet with us. French Ivorian Franklin Niamsi. A professor of philosophy in France, he's also a staunch opponent of Ivorian President Alassane Ouattara. Before speaking live, he refines his message.
I sort of do the same thing as jazz musicians because they know their scales, they can improvise. I let inspiration come and I talk to the crowd.
Franklin Niamsi has 630,000 followers on social media.
It's a pretty big audience, but it's not only African.
Almost every day on his YouTube channel, he decries France's policies in Africa.
Africa of freedoms, I greet you. How do terrorists finance themselves in Africa? That's the topic I'm going to address.
Usually he's critical of the French press, but the day of our visit, he chose an article published on the France 24 website. It's a summary of an investigation done by the New York Times on the business of hostages in the Sahel region. It was published in 2014.
We learned today that a large part of the money they have in their pockets comes from the hostage business, and that the biggest payers are those who say to Africans, "We're fighting terrorism by your side." No. How can we have lost 58 French soldiers, 59 according to some counts if I'm not mistaken, fighting terrorists to whom we're paying over $100 million on the pretext of freeing hostages? That's a real problem.
On pro-Russian accounts, France is regularly accused of financing and arming terrorist groups in the Sahel.
It's a very old narrative that doesn't come from Russia. What changed with the arrival of the Russians is that this narrative started to be repeated more and more often. We have to understand that these disinformation or amplification campaigns are fed by a real frustration and incomprehension at French policy.
On Franklin Niamsi's social media pages, Russian news gets top billing. Like Kemi Seba, he proclaims his affinity for Alexander Dugin, the Kremlin's ideologue. We found this video on the Russian equivalent of Facebook, a video conference organized by Dugin in April 2023.
I would like to greet Alexander Dugin and express all my friendship and all my admiration. Africa loves him.
Another man with whom Franklin Niamsi doesn't hide his closeness, Assimi Goïta, the head of Mali's military junta and a new ally of Wagner. When questioned, he downplays abuses committed by the Russian mercenaries.
Wagner is accused of committing abuses that, compared to colonial and neo-colonial abuses like slavery, are a drop of water in the ocean.
It's hard to determine the true nature of the ties between Niamsi and Moscow. In front of our camera, he categorically denied being at the service of the Kremlin.
I've never been to Russia. I don't know how to speak Russian. Russian media have understood the rejection that we experienced, we French Africans. They have a great window of opportunity. They write to us. They write to me by email to say, "We want to talk to you about this or that problem." I respond to the interview.
In April, Niamsi was suspended from his job as professor by the French Education Ministry, accused of breaching his duty to reserve personal opinion. On pro-Russian channels, he presented himself as a victim of the French state.
I'm a victim of political persecution in France.
We can't say that when someone has a Pan-African discourse, they're persecuted. What's new is that there's an information war. And in that context, yes, French authorities have a tendency to stiffen when they're faced with what they identify, for example, as agents or mercenaries of that type. I personally think it gives them too much credit. It gives them a destabilizing force that they don't have.
On June 24, 2023, Evgeny Prigozhin's Wagner forces launched a rebellion in Russia, finalizing the rift between Vladimir Putin and the man in charge of Russian propaganda in Africa.
One of the scenarios is that this monster created by Putin, that is the Wagner system, the Prigozhin system in Africa, finally turns against the interests of the Kremlin. And if that scenario happens, then that means the Russian state will need to find new outlets to spread influence.
In the meantime, Moscow can still rely on its influencers. According to them, the fratricidal war between Vladimir Putin and Evgeny Prigozhin is merely a smokescreen designed to destabilize the West.